Okay, to finish up on the social history, let's think of a particular event, um, because if you actually spend the time to dig into this and figure out about the 47 Ronin, then a lot of Japanese social logic makes sense. If you watch one of the original, by this I mean the non-Western 47 Ronin stories, and they generally do a new made-for-TV type drama just about every year around Christmas. And there's actually a term, it just escapes me. I'm having a mental brain fade. I can't remember the name of it. There's a technical term for slang term that's come up for these 47 Ronin stories that are done in the winter. Yeah, invariably one of the networks will come up with a new one, I think, almost every year. But if you go to YouTube and actually just type in 47 Ronin, you find a goofy one of Keanu Reeves a couple of years ago. But you also find some of the old black and white or the older original or more made by Japanese for Japanese versions of the story, which are, yeah, anyways, much more, I'm not sure realistic is the term, but much more to character. Um, so this is it's an important episode because in many ways it illustrates Japanese logic. It's also an important episode because it becomes part of the mythos that to Japanese in Japan, is an important part of their self-identity, especially in terms of values. And I should point out, there's certainly no equivalent to this. That the uh, the only Chinese stories I can think that'd be sort of mythos equivalent. Well, they're entirely different in terms of context of what they're doing. But Journey to the West would be one, and the water. Often I'm trying to think of the translation. Water Country would be the translation of the sort of Chinese bandits, um, that are, again, a hugely important Chinese story. But yeah, they're totally different than the 47 Ronin. But I mean, in terms of social importance, in the sense that they're popularistic, people understand them, they resonate with people because they bring, sort of core values to light. I suppose the water stories, or the water tales, or whatever it's called, would be, the Water Country would be the closest Chinese equivalent. Anyway, so 47 Ronin, it's based on a real event. Um, and what you have to remember is there's several things in play. One is the Tokugawas have come to power. So it's now 1700. So the Tokugawa government, shogunate, has been in power for 100 years. By now they've bolted down the society. So this is the caste system that they'd set up. Movement is very restricted. The Tokugawas and their Uji supporters, in other words, the Tokugawa cluster, if you would, of central authority, rules all of Japan, and rather brutally. One of the things they tend to do, which is not unique to Romans, love to do this too, but it's pretty typical in a lot of places, is that each of the other Uji or each of the clans would have to send clan members to live in Edo under shogunate supervision. And this was a form of sort of, blackmail, that you would have family members there. So if you start to cause trouble, or people think you're causing trouble out in the provinces somewhere, then the shogunate just kills your family. So it's a real quick way to make sure that people behave themselves, I guess you want to think of it. So it's been roughly almost 100 years since the last war, or the last part of the civil wars. So you've basically had, maybe 3 generations of samurai growing up without a war to fight. Um, and so what's happened is Bushido, the code of warrior behavior or warrior ethics, or what do you want to call it, that had been part of the Japanese logic for hundreds of years, changes radically. Bushido, prior to the Tokugawa reinvention of it, is sort of like early medieval chivalry. On one hand, it happened. On the other hand, it also was abused a lot. Um, so so it you couldn't assume it was going to take place. And that was because there were wars going on. People had more important things to deal with. Post 1600 in Japan, you don't have the wars anymore. So what happens is more and more samurai become concerned, and Tokugawas especially, become concerned with enforcing this caste segregation system. And so they sort of reinvent Bushido as a set of behaviors and ethical moral behavior that is unique to samurai. Other groups couldn't practice Bushido. They, they could take on the beliefs and the attitudes, but they couldn't actually use it in the sense they couldn't say they were following Bushido, because Bushido was unique and exclusive to the samurai. So to the players, an uji to the north in Japan that supported the Tokugawas, but were sort of in an uneasy relationship simply because they were far enough north. And on one hand, the Tokugawas didn't worry too much about what they were up to. On the other hand, they were a major power in the north. So, that always, especially as the Tokugawas would lose sleep in the middle of the night, this would be one of the groups that's supposed to get it'd be on their list of things to worry about, but not be paranoid about. So the head of the Asano clan, the Asano Uji in this period in 1700 is Naganori. So again, last name first. Now again, remember, for elites in Japan, for the samurai and the groups like them, they had last names. So unlike your bei or your commoners, they didn't see themselves as clans in the same way the Chinese did, but they had the names attached to it. So he was the head of the Asano clan, Asano Uji. The Tokugawa shogun at the time is Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi. So Tokugawa's family name, Tsuneyoshi, his personal name. So he's the fourth or fifth. I can't remember which of the Tokugawa shoguns he is number wise. His senior advisor, I suppose maybe you call him like his executive assistant / prime minister, is a guy named Kida Yoshinaka, a family name Kida, last name Yoshinaka. They were backers of the Tokugawas, to the extent that the Kida Uji considered itself to be a subordinate branch of the Tokugawas. I don't think the Tokugawas really bought into it. Their view of the Kida clan was sort of like, it was handy to have them around, but you really, when push came to shove, the Kidas had not been a big part of the military struggle for Tokugawa supremacy. And the Tokugawas, as was typical with the samurai in general, but certainly the shogun in specific, you had to spill a lot of blood to gain legitimacy, and the Kidas hadn't done that. They'd always been in the right place at the right time. They're always willing to, do whatever the Tokugawas asked. So they were useful to have around. Flunky would be the word that would come to mind. I'm sure the Kira clan today would be upset with that. Anyways, so those are your three main players. You've got this new Bushido, this idea, very rigid code of ethics, which large function is to make the samurai sort of exotically unique, so their behavior is different than anyone else's, that everyone's supposed to follow. Now, your fourth player here, who's actually probably the key player in some ways, is Oishi Yoshio. Now, the Oishi clan is a subordinate clan to the Asanos. So they're a subgroup of the Asanos, different family name, but again, with the idea of residence, they reside with the Asanos and the Asano, estate. So what happens is it's now 1702, 1701, 1702. The Tokugawas would go around various parts of the country and basically plop down at someone's estate and eat them out of house and home, cause trouble for a couple of months, then move on somewhere else. This had several functions. One is allowed them to keep an eye, especially in the more rural or the further away areas where they didn't have good reports about what was going on. So they could sort of check up on everyone. Secondly, as they would actually intentionally, use up as much of the resources as possible in these places, with the idea that the more resources you use up, the more crippled you make this other family, so they're less liable to try to get into trouble because they're basically bankrupt now. Tsuneyoshi decides that he's going to go wander up to the Asano estate in the north on one of these, party fact-finding missions. I don't know what you want to call it. So he has, of course, Kida Yoshinaka, since he's the prime minister, his head assistant, he's supposed to set it up. So what happens is Kida Yoshinaka goes up to the Asano Naganori and the Sano clan up there in the north, and they go, hey, the Tokugawas are going to come up here. Here's what you need to do. Here's how many people it's going to be. This is how many people you got to feed. Da, 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 da. They expect this type of, you got to behave in this way, and you got to do these things for them because they're in charge. By now, since it's 100 years into the Tokugawa shogunate, the shoguns more and more are acting like sort of like mini emperors. So more and more, there's these real rigid rules of behavior that you have to treat them. So in many ways, you have to treat them almost like a surrogate emperor. So there's the whole etiquette list in terms of how you're supposed to behave is sort of mind blowing. And the Asano clan goes, yeah, okay, no problem. And so what happens is the Tokugawa and his followers, specifically Kira and the other followers, go up north and go and hang out with the Asano clan. Now, Yoshinaka was supposed to prep everything. So he was supposed to go up there, teach the Asanos, this is what you do. This is what he likes to eat. This is when he gets up in the morning, whatever it might be. I have no idea. Now, when he goes up there, since he's pretty entrepreneurial, to put it mildly, he goes up there and he basically tells the son of Naganoi, well, I know what you're supposed to do to keep the Tokugawas happy, but I expect some sort of gift giving. You're going to have to give me something to get this info. It's going to cost you. For whatever reason, the Asanos had really bought into this Bushido thing. Now, one of the side parts of the Bushido thing is you're not supposed to have to bribe people. Samurai are supposed to act like samurai because they're samurai. So they're supposed to act ethically, especially towards other samurai, just because we're part of the same group. Well, Yoshinaka asking for bribes is not Bushido. That's very tacky. So Asano gets offended by all this. And so Naganoi and Yoshinaka, or if you go to the Asanos and the Kiras, get off at each other. And so what happens is, among other things, is Kira Yoshinaka, when he goes back to Edo, starts bad-mouthing the Asanos to the Tokugawas. I tried to tell these guys what to do, but they're a bunch of dumb nuts. They don't know what to do. They don't want to do it. And they're acting like a bunch of little kids, and they're pouting. And I'm really worried they might not have your best interest at heart. So he's really, really messing with everything. For whatever reason, Tokugawa Tsuruyoshi starts to buys into it. Maybe because Kira was his boy. Anyways. So they go up there for the trip. Immediately things start to go wrong. Food isn't where it's supposed to be. Some ceremonies aren't happening the way that they're supposed to happen. And Kira's adamant. The Kiras are adamant, especially Yoshinaka's adamant. Hey, man, we told them what to do. They screwed up. The Asanos, especially Naganori, are all pissed off because they're like, well, you guys didn't tell us what to do. And that's I'm guaranteed it's true. The Kira clan intentionally kept information away because they want Naganori to look as stupid and, as they're going to argue intentionally bad as possible. So he's intentionally acting like a dumbass just to basically show that he doesn't buy into Tokugawa shogunate power. So it's like implicit revolt, I guess, for lack of a better term. So what happens is eventually comes to the head. I can't remember. I almost forget what it is. There's some confrontation in a corridor in the Asano, palace or building or whatever you want to call it, right near where Tokugawa Tsuruyoshi is hanging out. And Kira Yoshinaka gets into it with Asano Naganori. It's not clear who pulled the first blade. They're using the short knife. They're not using the long knife. They're not using the tanto. So anyways, at the end result of it, Naganori slightly hurts. He certainly cuts Yoshinaka. Yoshinaka immediately screams for the Tokugawa bodyguards and say that Naganori has pulled a blade in front of the shogun, and obviously this is the story. He's gonna whack the shogun. Despite the fact that Tsuruyoshi was his boss, he apparently didn't completely believe Kira Yoshinaka. So he doesn't. Otherwise, he just would have erased the clan right there at the spot. He doesn't. He basically disowns the clan. He breaks up the clan. He says the Asanos do not exist as a family anymore. He tells Naganori that you are going to be, you're going to commit execution. You're going to commit suicide, seppuku. And you're going to do that as an apology for your behavior, which is totally inappropriate. The fact that he does this instead of the other stuff he could have done sort of suggests that he had something that he knew what Kiyoshi Naka and them were up to. And the reason for that I'll get to in just a sec. So the end result is the clans now disown. The Asano clan ceases to exist. Their Mon or their similar, whatever you want to call it, is now dropped from the list. And all members of the Asano clan now have no last name, which of course makes them now commoners. Now, what's supposed to happen is theoretically all the sort of middle senior members of the Asano clan should now commit suicide or seppuku also, because their lord and master is now dead and they have failed to protect him. In other words, they failed in their duties. This was undoubtedly what the kiddas expected was going to happen. It doesn't. What happens instead is a group of the, I suppose for lack of better terms, the immediate bodyguards of Asano Naganori just walk off. This is called Ronin. Ronin is a technical term for samurai who lose their master. So if you would, they have no boss. Oftentimes called leaderless samurais, I think the technical term in English. And the sort of the non-leader leader of all this is this Oishi Yoshio, who was actually the number 3 or number 4 in the military of Asano's, bodyguard. And so what happens is these guys just, they don't do what they're supposed to. They're supposed to, if you were honorable, if you were following, quote, Bushido, unquote, or is this post-1600 version, they're supposed to commit seppuku. They don't. They instead walk off and basically just disappear. Asano Naganori is executed, or miraculously, they execute him themselves. Now, what happens then immediately is the Kiyoshi Naka and his uji take control of all the Asano properties. Their houses, their farmlands, this whole huge northern estate. Immediately, they give roughly half of that to Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi. So the Tokugawas and the kiddas split up the Asano properties. So that's why I suspect that Tokugawa was either involved in all this from the get-go, or this was the payoff for him to sort of, not look into it more thoroughly. Anyways, all this is a total abuse of Bushido. Yoshinaka has not been operating within Bushido logic from the get-go in all this. The minute that the Tokugawas take control of part of the Asano properties, they've also breached Bushido, because you're supposed to treat other samurai honorably. This real obviously was a setup. Even at the time, everyone knew it was a setup. So everyone's all edged out that this isn't being done by the rules. This is totally unethical behavior by everyone involved. Because they're worried about what Oishi and the other Ronin are doing, they actually keep the Kidda clan actually keeps spies watching them for the next, I don't know if it's 6 months. I can never remember the sort of next 6 months, I think. And what they find is, one, they don't contact each other. 2 is some of them become drunkards. I think 3 become prostitutes. They become like, quote, dregs of society, unquote. They all basically disown themselves from their own family. So they become like the almost stereotype of the uber Ronin. Ronin are always seen as like having given up because they're not doing the samurai thing anymore, especially this post 1600 Bushido. These guys become like these poster child for bad behavior or ethically or morally disgusting behavior. So eventually these spies just, the kiddas and the Tokugawas decide, these folks are just losers. And they quit keeping track of them. Right around Christmas time, so I think it's either November, December, the Oishi group, there's actually 48 Ronin originally. One of them dies of pneumonia or something like that before it all happens. Get together because when they had first broken up, they'd agreed that they were you have to become invisible, but we're going to meet and November 15th, 1702, we're going to meet. And here's where we're going to meet. So they'll show up. And what they do is they had agreed that they were going to wait for this period of time for revenge, because they knew if they tried to do something right away, the Kiras and the Tokugawas just would have taken them out. I mean, they'd outnumbered them probably like 501. So there was no way that they were going to get what they wanted, which is the concept of revenge on this bad behavior and the death of their master, Son of Naganori. So what they do is they wait. They come out, we'll see again, October, November 15th, they get together. Oishi has actually planned what they're going to do. And it's a very sophisticated plan. This is one reason why this is such an important story to the Japanese, is because the planning is absolutely key to it. This whole thing right from the get-go is actually planned as a way, planned as a way to get back at these guys. Now, what they realize, if they just go back and whack someone, okay, fine, that you might have got that done. But what they really are pissed off at is the fact that on one hand, the Tokugawa specifically are promoting this Bushido thing. On the other hand, it's only been around for less than 100 years. You may turn around and they ignore it when they're going to get some benefit out of it. And so what Oishi decides is that he's going to play to their worst fear. The worst fear, of course, is to look foolish and to make the Tokugawas look like a bunch of idiots and liars, because they're the shogun. They've got to be the best at all this stuff, or else they shouldn't stay shogun. So he's going to threaten their actual control. And how can you only do that with 47 guys? Well, what you have to do is you have to stage everything so that the story becomes more than the event. So this thing it's an amazingly sophisticated piece of gamesmanship by Oishi Yoshio, because everyone seems to agree the whole thing was his idea. What they decide they're going to do is they're going to screw the Tokugawas over with their own logic. So it's now sometime in winter, and all the stories, this all takes place in the winter in the snow, and I remember one of the real famous versions of this done in the 70s, beautifully photographed with the snow coming down and stuff like that. Just it really is photogenic in its own brutal way. So it's now winter. The Kira clan is hanging out at their estate in Edo, which is right next door to the Tokugawa headquarters. And so what they do is they come over the walls, tear into the estate, attack the Kira Yoshinaka's guards. They kill some of them. They intentionally don't kill any more than necessary. And what they do is they go after, they catch Kira as he's running around. And at least the stories seem to agree that he wasn't even acting in samurai fashion. He was running around trying to escape. If he was being a true Bushido samurai, he should have pulled out his sword, just gone at these guys. So they catch him, they whack his head. They then leave. Now, theoretically, if they'd been sort of, what Bushido was in its more traditional form, they would have killed everyone on the Kira estate. That's how you did it back in the old days. Think this way. These guys are playing to this new ethical code of honor. So what they do is they take his head. They look at back up north. I can't remember. It's like 1,500. I can't remember how many kilometers it's north of Edo, to where the Asano has been buried, and they plop his head down on top of the tomb. They then make sure that everyone hears about what they've done. So they don't go after Tsuneyoshi. They do this all in public, none of this, except sneaking onto the estate. But all the rest of it after that, they just march to the north, and they've got, it's pretty clear there must have been a pretty sizable group, I expect even of other samurai who weren't involved in all this, who were just sort of watching all this happen. This becomes like a big social event. Boy, if they'd had YouTube back then, good Lord. So anyhow, this event's now done. Now, again, if they were going to be real Ronin, they would have then disappeared in the countryside, but they don't. They just park their butts down next to the tomb, and they wait for what Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi's going to do. Now, he's got a huge problem. One is in their, prescription that these guys write up. They say they've got no complaints against the Tokugawa. Their complaint is only with Kira Yoshinaka. Their only complaint was Tsuneyoshi. Tsuneyoshi listened to him. So they make it very clear, this isn't revolt. We're not against the government. We're very pro-government. We're even not, anti-Tsuneyoshi. He made a mistake here is what they're saying. So if you remember when I was talking about the military last time, I taught this idea where you can kill someone for their own good. This is sort of the precursor of that. They're not going after Tsunayoshi, but they're blaming him for what Kid Yoshinaka got away with, which actually is probably totally accurate in hindsight. But now he's got to figure out what he's going to do. If he just executes them, like sends his army up and just whacks these guys, then everyone's going to be all upset because everyone knows in reality Tsunayoshi was wrong. Kid Yoshinaka was even more wrong, but Tsunayoshi ended up with half of the Asano estate. So, his hands are all covered in blood with this mess too. If on the other hand, he doesn't do something, if he just lets Kira's head sit on the Asano tomb, one is it's not going to look pretty good. Secondly, is it's going to sort of say that being a backer of the Tokugawas doesn't give you any protection, that someone can come after your ass, regardless of how legit it is, and the Tokugawas won't support you. So that doesn't work. You can't just let this happen. You've got to do something. So he's got to somehow get rid of these guys. And they pretty much set up, so his only option under this Bushido code that he was a big but up about is he tells them they've got to commit seppuku. They've got to commit suicide, which is technically called harakiri in this situation. And they do. They all formally line up and they do this in a mass ceremony. There's tons of other samurai around. Everyone and his brother, all the other uji are watching this. Now you have to remember the other ujis have only been under Tokugawa control for 100 years. Tsunayoshi is not seen as a particularly strong leader. And so it's like having a bunch of, you suddenly started, you're doing something and there's a bunch of sharks in the water. Now you've spilled blood in there. All these sharks, all these uji are circling, trying to decide if, is this the time? Should we take the Tokugawas on? Should we take these guys down or should we just let it go? End result is no one decides to make a big deal of it per se. Having said that, it immediately within, I think I read somewhere, within a year, you see this becoming popular in plays and stuff, even in Edo. So it gets popularized probably the minute the guys committed ritual suicide. It becomes popularized in the eyes of the Japanese public, and even in the eyes, eyes of the other Japanese samurai, because these guys always acted with Bushido. Everything they did was ethical. Almost everything that Tsunayoshi and Yoshinaka did was unethical. So what you find is by the next year, really nice tombstones have been put up by other families. A lot of samurai from other families, even heads of other families, come and start giving offerings at the New Year's to their shrine, which it very quickly becomes. It's still one of the more popular shrines in that part of Japan. Now what that means in an interesting way is the Tokugawas are really stuck. This event's now done. These guys are dead. So on one hand, it's finished. But given the social reaction, even by other samurai, it's not finished. In fact, it's never going to be finished. The Tokugawas are never going to be able to play down what happened here. And so they just sort of try to move on from it. Having said that, it never happens. More and more over time, the 47 Ronin story becomes a mainstay of Japanese drama, politics, Japanese history, Japanese, literature, poetry, you name it. It becomes a theme. And the two main themes here are this idea of loyalty to your master. We see Asano Naganori, and also morality. That morality is such a big deal, especially if you want to follow this Bushido code, that you've got to be willing not only to kill people for it, and not only to debase yourself when these guys were alive, but also to commit suicide, to die for it. Loyalty and morality are worth dying for, is basically sort of the punchline of all this. And these guys do it cleanly. I mean, they do it in a beautiful, very stylish fashion that only the Japanese can manage. Chinese wouldn't. I was talking to one of my sisters once. Chinese can understand the story, but they can't imagine making choices and decisions like that because it would just, the context wouldn't make any sense. It's a very Japanese thing. By the rise of the Meiji Emperor, not surprisingly, the Meiji informally really promotes this 47 Ronin story because he's trying to sort of morph the samurai into something different. He wants to, bring it up where samurai screwed up or samurai concepts were abused is actually part and parcel of this PR campaign. Um, so pushing the 47 Ronin story is a pretty logical move if you're the Meiji. Post Meiji, what happens is, again, this idea of Bushido now becomes, since the samurai are no longer the same political force they were, pre 1868. You can now just spin this as a story. This becomes the equivalent of the Song of Roland. Was it Roland? Yeah, Roland, the French epic. Um, Arthur. Arthur in the British literature would be the closest equivalent to this. We have a whole series of moral and social stories that are tied around, events. The only difference is where the Arthurian legends are legendary. They're complex system. The 47 Ronin is real. I mean, these guys are real. You can actually go to their tombs. So I mean, this is much more grounded in history. Post World War II, so the samurai and the whole samurai value have become devalued because they have been a failure. The war was lost. World War II was the Japanese premise of World War II and why they were going to be successful is that samurai values and Bushido would overcome numbers and technology and stuff that the British and the Americans and other folks had. That didn't work. Worked just the opposite. So samurais become discredited. Japanese in general have to find some new sense of understanding of who they are, some new belief system, some new way to ground their sort of nationalistic attitude about who they are and identity. And so what happens is a new version of Bushido shows up. So this idea of loyalty, morality, and stuff like that now gets morphed from the samurai to Japanese, and specifically Japanese civil service. Well, no, Japanese workers. The classic, what we call in Japan, the salaryman. So what you find is by the 1950s and certainly by the 1960s, is Japan respins the Ronin, i.e. the 47 Ronin, as the medieval, if you would, equivalent to the guy that works for Sony or Mitsubishi or Matsushita or something like that, from 9 to 7 at night, 6 days a week. He's the modern version of that samurai. And not surprising, people buy into it. I mean, that becomes the identity, the same way that Americans like to view themselves as being, the Wild West or the, New England militiamen, fighting against British and oppressive imperialism or whatever. Americans still buy into something they have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Japanese, in large part, are buying into a thing which they have absolutely no idea they're talking about. I mean, they have a little more sense of the history, but boy, they have no idea what that lifestyle was like. What you find is if you're conservative, by this time, I mean, especially nowadays, if you're a nationalist, but especially an ultra uber conservative nationalist in Japan, you have to go up and give offerings to burn incense at shrines in New Year's and the 1st of January. Yakuza, interesting enough, who are a very conservative element of Japanese society traditionally. The criminal gangs in Asia are very different than their Euro-American counterparts, but they're very, very socially conservative. And they're actually one of the first groups post World War II to jump on this whole idea of venerating the 47 Ronin. And according to a friend of mine who should know, the police, or I should say, well, the equivalent of, I guess it'd be FBI in Japan, the security agency, still videotapes everyone going to the shrines around New Year's because anyone who's anybody in the Yakuza, in the middle higher ranks has to go to those shrines. It's a required yearly pilgrimage, just like it is for ultra conservatives. These two groups aren't necessarily totally different, by the way. So what you find is the 47 Ronin story is just as strong, or maybe stronger now, for an entirely different set of a very different but related set of reasons, but still emphasizing loyalty and morality, just without sort of the samurai spin to it, as it was, a couple of hundred years ago. So the irony of all this is, even many Japanese would have no idea who Tokugawa Tsuneyoshi is. I'm not sure if the Kira, I should check sometime. I'm not sure if the Kira clan still exists, if the Kira Uji still exists. I would think that if I was part of the Kira Uji, given their role in this whole story, that I'd want to change my last name. I don't think I'd want to be walking around with the mold of that family in the 20th century, especially post World War II in Japan. That would be really awkward. There'd be no good way you could spin that I can think of. Now, one of the other things that's important to remember, this one we'll finish up, we're going to stop with this story, is this is important because of the imagery. It sets a bunch of imagery that is very much part of the way the Japanese view the world around them. And again, it's unique to Japan. It's not an Asian thing, it's a Japanese thing. This is actually at the Imperial Park. This is just, I'm right outside the Imperial Palace in Kyoto. You know what, maybe 12, 14 years ago, we just happened to be there. The cherry blossoms bloomed early. And the Imperial, not surprising since it's the Imperial Palace, since it's actually much more of a garden palace, it's much more accessible than the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, which I find that's just a weird place. But the one in Kyoto is very, for lack of a better term, very aesthetically Japanese. And so what you find is this becomes sort of the image. The image of the 47 Ronin is the cherry blossom, which is sort of odd because, of course, when they're doing this, it's winter. The cherries are all in hibernation. But the key here is this is the Japanese image of a lot of stuff. Life is temporary. Everything is superficial. Everything is not only subject to change, but it will change. And you can't guarantee what the changes are going to be like. And so this is to the Japanese, this is a huge part of the resonance of the 47 Ronin. No one in that story, especially the Asano clan, thought what was going to happen happened to them. It was totally unexpected. It was totally unprovoked. And it was brutal. It was cruel. It was, but it was what it was. Shit happens. And so to the Japanese, this is that and the cherry blossom are tied intimately together. So this lady's showing her baby the cherry blossoms. The kid's too young to understand, but she knows that somehow part of this in some way, shape, or form will stick to it. Now, what you won't find Japanese is lecturing kids about what the blossoms mean. They'll just show them the blooms. In a couple of months, they might come back, and what you're going to find is this will all be green. The blossoms drop off. Cherry blossoms only last about 2 or 3 weeks at max. And this is a very rare color, actually. So they've got these beautiful blooms. They're real fragile, and they're very temporary. They're only going to last a couple of weeks. And when they show up is never the same. It's a big news event in Japan when the cherry blossoms start to show up. And the family's involved in doing travel, but trying to set up travel to go see the cherry blossom festival is like it never happens the way it's supposed to. And the reason, very simply, is the fact that you can never guarantee that, even if everyone says the blossoms will bloom here, these blossoms were 2 weeks early. They were supposed to show up for another 2 weeks. So all the tours, I can guarantee there are probably tons of tours that were going to go to the Imperial Garden in Kyoto. So it's like that's one of the places. They're all going to miss it. By the time they get there, this boulder will be powell. There'll be maybe 5 blooms on it. It's done its thing already. So she's showing there's this incredible beauty here. All this really intense color, all these other colors around, they were all in bloom simultaneously. They always bloom simultaneously in one spot. And it's not going to be there. There's the green of the branches that's going to replace the leaves are going to replace the blooms in just literally a week or two. So when this kid comes back, the next time they come back, it's not going to be the same anymore. The tree might be a little bit larger, it might be dead. The blooms won't be there. Next year at another time in the same place, but at another time, the blooms will be back. So all this is superficial. She's going to be a little bit older. The kid's going to be a little bit. Other things won't change around them. Everything in Japan is subject to change. And this is why the cherry blossom is not such an absolutely central image to the Japanese. It's because to them it reflects everything about the world around them and the world they live in. Everything is subject to change. Everything's temporary. Life is temporary. Blooms are temporary. Winter and summer are temporary. The 47 Ronin are temporary. You can't count on anything being around tomorrow. And so you've got to deal with things as they are. And this is a huge central part of Japanese society, Japanese philosophy, everything about Japan is the temporary nature of the world around us. Now, the interesting thing is that doesn't mean the Japanese see this as all being superficial. Their view is this is the world we live in. It doesn't matter whether you like it, doesn't matter you like, don't like it. This is it. This is the world. The only ones that don't deal with that are the hikikomori, the guys that actually live in their room and never leave it and try to basically pretend the world doesn't exist. But even that doesn't work because the sewage system, food, everything. I mean, you still live in the world. I have no idea exactly what this guy's thinking. Um, yeah, all these books and everything's temporary. He's temporary. His friend is temporary. All this won't be around in a couple of weeks. And I'm sure you can see he's thinking about the temporary nature. So this is Japan. I mean, the cherry blossoms are temporary, but the memory of the blossoms will be there forever. In his memory, I would guarantee he's thinking about what was. You're just seeing his expression. But it's also experiencing what is here. So it's the past grounded in the present with the assumption that, he might not have a lot of futures left in him. But there's trees. The park will be there for a while. The trees will be there. Cherry blossoms will be somewhere. The 47 Ronin were only there in fame for a year and a half. But the memory of them has lasted for centuries.